to be clear, these feelings of anxiety don't just apply to professional athletes. It applies to anybody who's spent a significant amount of time putting work, putting effort into the sport that they are participating in. And when you have to give all of that up, that's where these factors come into play. Today, we're talking about retiring from a sport and transitioning out of a sport that you participated in for a really long time. Now, transitioning out of a sport is hard. You spend a significant portion of your life dedicated to your sport. You spend all this time, energy, and effort into creating something that's sustainable and that you love participating in. It gives you a sense of purpose. It gives you a sense of identity. It gives you social connections. And it can be really difficult to transition and adjust to a new lifestyle and find that same kind of fulfillment in it. Now, the trouble with this transition is that it's not just missing the sport, right? I mean, yes, you're probably going to miss the physical and the emotional kinds of competition, but you're also going to miss that sense of camaraderie, that sense of competition and the challenges that lead up to those big moments. And when you're able to make it through and really drive through those moments of competition, there's a sense of loss and some of the challenges that you guys might face in the process of dealing with that are things like depression and anxiety and even just a general sense of loss. Now, let's talk about a little bit of the anxiety factor first. When it comes to anxiety, you're probably going to have a moment when you don't know what to do next. The future is very uncertain and you're not entirely sure how things are going to look moving forward. Are you going to continue as like a coach? Are you removing yourself from the sport completely? What are you going to do, if anything, after you retire from the thing that you were doing for all these years? And because of that uncertainty, there's a lot of anxiety that can build, and feelings of nervousness, of worry, of fear, which could be difficult to manage. And to be clear, these feelings of anxiety don't just apply to professional athletes. It applies to anybody who's spent a significant amount of time putting work, putting effort into the sport that they are participating in. And when you have to give all of that up, that's where these factors come into play. Anxiety in particular being one where you don't really have a clear direction of where you're heading in the future. And you don't have a clear direction of what you're going to do next or how you're going to end up getting there in the end. The other part is financial strain. If you were getting paid to compete, there are going to be moments where you might have financial worries or financial difficulties because you don't have that same source of income coming in. And so there's going to be some strain and some stress and possibly anxiety coming in from that financial instability. The other part of the spectrum is dealing with the loss. Dealing with the fact that you are losing a piece of yourself, potentially, when you stop participating in your sport. And so a lot of times there's a higher risk for athletes to struggle with things like depression. Because you've spent such a significant portion of time dedicated to your sport or your activity, and you identify really strongly with it. When you stop doing that, when you retire from that, it can cause you to lose a sense of your identity, to lose your purpose, and to lose your sense of direction. And you're also probably going to miss out on the emotional highs and even some of the lows of competing and of having that camaraderie and being a part of a team. And it can be difficult to have those same positive feelings, those same feelings of success and teamwork and the challenges and even the struggles that go along with it. But when that goes away, it can lead to these feelings of emptiness, of having a difficulty with enjoying the same activities that you once really loved to participate in. Now, digging into a little bit more on the depression side, some things about depression in general are, one, you have a difficulty adjusting to a new lifestyle. And as an athlete who is transitioning out of their sport, you might have trouble transitioning from a structured, very goal-oriented, very regimented training style into a lifestyle that maybe doesn't have as much structure to it, or maybe doesn't have the same kind of regiment to it. And so you might have that difficulty with adjusting to a new schedule and a new lifestyle. Physical injuries are another thing that you have to consider. When you are retiring as an athlete, your body's probably going to be a little beat up. It's probably going to be, banged up, and you might have some injuries to deal with. And that might make it difficult for you to continue to participate in any kind of physical activity that you enjoy doing. And, it kind of adds on to that feeling of sadness and hopelessness, because not only now can you not compete in the thing that you loved doing before, but now your body's starting to shut down and it's not even cooperating with you. And so physical injuries are a big thing to factor into the emotional and mental state of a person who's transitioning out of their sport. The other thing, and this is a big one for me personally, is the loss of social connections. When you compete, you form really close bonds with the people that you're competing with, whether that's your teammates, your coaches, other people who are competing. And transitioning out of that sport or retiring from that sport can mean that you're losing those social connections, and it really can create a sense of isolation with a lot of people. And so it's important to note that, with anxiety, with depression, there are things that can be treated, and there are tons of different options out there as far as, seeking therapists or other counselors. But it can also include things like therapy, like I mentioned, meditation, maybe even support groups. If it gets really severe, talking to your doctors about potential medication that you take to supplement with that. And so it's important to have a support system in place as you're transitioning out of your sport, because things like anxiety and depression are really prevalent and they're going to creep up on you, and it can be really hard to deal with those things if you're trying to tackle it alone. So find those close friends, find your family, find a mental health professional. Maybe rely on your teammates if you and somebody else are kind of transitioning out at the same time. That way you guys can stay in contact and be able to kind of share the struggles that you're having based on where you're at in your transition, right? The thing is, when you transition out of a sport that you spent so many years dedicated to, and so much time and effort and blood and sweat and tears went into working on becoming better and competing at the highest level that you could compete at, when you have to give all of that up and quit cold turkey, it sucks. For me, made it feel like there was this giant hole in my chest when I went through it. And there are moments when I thought that I had buried that part of me and put it to the side and didn't have to worry about it or have to think about it anymore, but it still continued to creep up. It hits you at unexpected moments. Now, I spent a long time working in funeral service and in the death care industry. I am pretty familiar with the grieving process. And some of you might have heard of the 5 stages of grief, right? Denial, bargaining, depression, anger, and acceptance. Now, here's the thing about those stages. It's not a linear thing. It's not a static transition where you go through one stage to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and then you're done, and you're healed, and it's great, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. That's not true. It's one of those situations where you're going to bounce back and forth between all 5 of those stages, because maybe one day you accept the fact that you're not going to be able to compete anymore, but then the next you're really angry about it because you still had so much more that you wanted to give, but maybe you're dealing with an injury that shut you out. Or maybe you're in denial about the fact that you were having to stop competing in the first place, and you feel like you can still do it even though like there's restrictions in your life that are just like, this is not happening anymore, you have to give it up. And then, you know, the depression will come in waves. Ultimately, it is going to be one of those things that ebbs and flows, and there are going to be days where you feel really good about where you're at and really bad about where you're at. And that's part of the grieving cycle. And as athletes, it's important to acknowledge that what we are transitioning from is a loss. It is something that we are losing, and especially if it's something that you tied a big part of your identity to, and you tied a big part of your sense of self to, you have to be able to hold space and acknowledge that that is a piece of you that you're going to grieve and that you're going to mourn. And when you turn that internal grief into external mourning through your support groups, through your support systems, that's what's going to help you transition and take things day by day and end up being in a place where, yeah, you might have those nostalgic moments where you watch someone who's competing and you're like, man, I used to do that, and I used to do that really well. And it might be that bittersweet moment, but it's not something that's going to take you out and cripple you for the next 2 or 3 months. You'll have a more stable way to regulate those emotions. But if we don't bring light to this subject in the first place, then it's going to be harder to acknowledge it and understand that this is something that many athletes go through, regardless of where they're at in their transition and in their sport and in their career. It's something that we all have a tendency to struggle with, because there's going to be change, because there's going to be things where we have to, you know, move through, and sometimes our lives have to call us into a different direction, and that's okay. But when we acknowledge that these are the things that are going to surface potentially, we're able to have a more proactive approach to it. Now, I'm not saying that depression and anxiety are things that you can just nip in the bud and kick it and you're going to be good to go. That's just not the case. But the more we're aware of it, the more that we can identify what those symptoms are and why we might be feeling that way, the more it's going to help us understand and realize the directions that we need to go to and the support systems that we can put in place to help with that. Push the stigma of depression and anxiety and whatever other mental health issues that you might be struggling with, bringing those to light and helping other people in our community work through them. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys got some value out of this one. It's a subject that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and I will catch you in the next video.